Any good story must have twists and turns. The unexpected. Turn a corner, find an enemy, or a trap, or a plot twist. Simply put, chaos. A good story and a good D&D adventure must be somewhat chaotic. But undirected chaos can feel more frivolous than fun. Undirected, almost untapped, because it's like, oh, if you're not directing the chaos, then it's directing you, so to speak. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How to add some chaos to an otherwise storybook plot or overly planned campaign in a meaningful way that actually improves the experience. But first, my name is Tanner Wayland, and this is the How to Be a Better DM podcast, a podcast for DMs who get frustrated when things are going a little bit too smoothly for their players. Now, to get to the topic, why do DMs get frustrated at an overly smooth ride for their players? Obviously, sometimes it's a sadistic streak. We like to give them a hard time, revel in the power, or maybe you do. I'm just kidding. Basically, sometimes it's fun to give them a hard time, but I actually think it's deeper than that. I think that when you're getting frustrated that the players are just kind of going on a smooth ride, they don't seem to be getting surprised, they don't seem to be having a hard time, and everything's kind of dancing to their tune, it might be a subconscious realization on your part that the players are adapting too easily, and that likely means that the adventure isn't surprising, stimulating, or challenging enough. Now, adding some chaos into the story and the role play and the combats and the exploration is just what the doctor ordered to make it stimulating and surprising and challenging, right? So here are some specific tips, 4 of them. One for each of those kind of areas, combat, role play, exploration, etc. There are obviously a lot more out there, and I hope that you have some ideas as we talk about this, but I think these ones have big potential to add chaos in a way that you'll really love. Now, number 1, and this is about adding chaos to the plot or to the story. It's a jump forward or jump sideways. Now, what does that mean? Players expect a certain cadence to the story, mostly depending on how you lay it out, right? Because sometimes you telegraph like, oh, there's a big bad, you need to gather these 3 items for it to work out, right? Or you need to go do this, then this, then this. It's very easy for players to kind of get this idea of what the story is going to be like, right? But imagine their surprise when you coordinate for them to skip a few steps. They suddenly have multiple artifacts rather than, or maybe they just came out of an ancient ruin grabbing one artifact, and suddenly there's a caravan in front of them, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is the big bad's, soldiers, and it looks like they're transporting something important. And suddenly they have 2 of the artifacts that they need, right? And then suddenly it's like, oh, whereas we thought we'd have to go do a whole another set of things, suddenly we're going to be right on track to jump into the big bad's, castle or whatever, right? That's kind of an example of a jump forward. It's them thinking that the plot is going to take this much time or going to take these certain steps, and you kind of surprise them by being like, hey, it's not that deep. You're actually ahead. Now, a jump sideways I find to be really fun. It's less of a getting further ahead in the journey and more the train switching tracks and heading off in a different direction, right? They thought they were facing one thing, but instead, suddenly they're facing another. As an example, the big bad turned out to be a puppet for someone even bigger and even badder. The party that's an example of like, hey, kind of a sidestep to be like, oh, this thing that you thought was your ultimate goal is not actually your ultimate goal. And so with that being the case, that's one version. I find another version of jumping sideways to be really fun, which is kind of sidestep the main adventure entirely. It could be as simple as, your party finds themselves stranded on a separate continent after being out at sea and, being caught in a really terrible storm. And there they face an entirely new quest and objective and fight new enemies and everything, right? It total surprise for them. They thought one thing, and suddenly you're like, you know what? I felt like this adventure was getting a little stale. We're kind of sidestepping or jumping sideways to an entirely new adventure. Which, of course, who wouldn't be surprised by that? Now, let's say that they eventually do get back to the normal quest. At that point, you have the fun opportunity to either show them how much they've grown by being like, oh, the big bad that you were so worried about, now he's a little bad compared to how much you've grown. And that's fun. And then, you can build on top of that. Or in the time they've been gone, the situation has gotten a lot worse and a lot more interesting. So there's a few different ways that you can implement this jump forward or jump sideways to add chaos, to add a surprise to what they were expecting. Now, let's talk about combat. How can you add chaos there? For the second tip, it's about adding an element or adding an enemy or adding anything mid-combat. Now, that might seem a little too simple and like, oh, Tanner, well, duh. Well, no duh, rather. Obviously, you add things mid-combat. But think about it. When was the last time you actually did add something mid-combat? Combats are supposed to have a flow, a change, and become even more exciting over time. But does it usually go that way? Typically from what I've seen, everything is set at the start of combat, right? You kind of like lay it out, and you're like, hey, here's the enemies, and here's the terrain, and then the players kind of just, the thing that makes it different is the enemy's abilities, the players, strategies and everything like that, right? Now that's fun, but it's planned, right? And while I think adding a trap in the middle is nice, I think adding entirely new elements is actually very exciting. Think about some examples from awesome books or movies that we've watched or read. In The Lord of the Rings, the Balrog appears mid-combat. Think about it. They're running from some from some goblins in the mines of Moria, and suddenly this huge boss appears when they weren't already feeling ready to deal with the mini enemies. And then on top of that, even the bridge breaks mid-combat, and the stairs, right? And all these different things. I think that sometimes we're a little too safe. And you know why I think this happens? I think we're worried about overloading the players or killing them, or maybe we're worried that players will stick around until they've tried hopelessly to kill all the enemies. Whatever it is, I think it holds us back. So keep this in mind. It's a wonderful idea to add things mid-combat, and if your original plan for the combat needs to change in order for that addition to work, then great, do it. So if you need a different kind of objective that, okay, if a Balrog type giant boss appears, who's maybe slow, but it packs a punch, maybe you don't just make the main objective, hey, beat everybody. Maybe the objective's more like run away. Or it's like, oh, grab that item and then run away. Or take out one specific medium or weak tier enemy who's like an influential character. Because, combat power doesn't have to equate to power within the story, right? But basically just change up the combat objective so that you can justify putting in these mid-combat changes and it doesn't feel like the end of the world. I think that there's so many great examples, right? Like other examples, Star Wars. So while Luke is fighting Darth Vader in the carbonite chamber, suddenly they change settings entirely. They were in the carbonite chamber with these different traps and different settings at different enemies, and suddenly they go down a tube, and it's an entire another area, and things are getting thrown instead of just saber combat. And that's a simple thing, but it's the kind of thing that changes up combat enough for the players to be like, oh, I don't just think about what I want to do and what the enemy's doing. I've got to think about the environment. I've got to think about everything, right? It's not just about throwing another enemy in combat or springing a little environmental factor. Those can be fun, but it's about adding things that really change the game and make the players think different, right? And as another example, because I love these examples, Indiana Jones. right? And the Temple of Doom specifically. In that, there's a whole minecart chase sequence, right? I'm sure I could have mentioned one of the other movies too, but this one specifically, at the start of the combat, they are fighting enemies while also trying to make sure that they don't crash and everything else like that, right? And so while they're fighting these enemies, it's like, oh my goodness, that's the focus. And then mid-combat, suddenly they're running away from water. Very different and much more exciting than just killing all the enemies and then, okay, combat's over. It's like, no, the entire thing changed. The enemies basically died from the water. I think they may have actually died before then, but would have been cool to be like, hey, these enemies that you've been so focused on fighting in this D&D, in this combat encounter, suddenly you don't have to worry about them because they got killed by this other thing that now you have to run away from or deal with or protect yourself against using other non-combat abilities because it's more environmental, right? There's a lot of ways that you can do it. It's about surprising and shocking rather than annoying with your new combat additions. Now, let's talk about roleplay and how to add chaos into just a normal conversation as, you know, with you being the NPC or some rando that the players are talking to. So first off, what you're going to want to do is, this tip is about the switch up. It's position switching or side switching. What does this mean? Have you ever had a player who just continues to throw themselves over and over again at an NPC requesting the same thing? Or like digging in a way that, you know, they try different ways of digging into the conversation or different questions or different abilities, you know, intimidation, persuasion, all these different things, just to get like a certain result. It kind of gets frustrating because you're like, come on, move on. It didn't work, right? But what if suddenly you just decide, oh, NPC is going to switch. And whereas before these players were like, oh, hey, come on, give us your farm. We want to be farmers because we have this random, weird, fun idea. And the NPC's like, no, it's my livelihood. It's my family farm. What, you know, and this has gone on for a sec. What if suddenly the NPC was like, you know what? I can see that you're really serious about this. You know what? You can have my farm. Now you might be thinking, Tanner, that's, are you just rolling over, right? Well, what if it's not so much of a rollover as it is a misdirect? And maybe instead of playing a game of, let's see if a roll or a random comment can help me get my way, what if instead it's like the NPC is actually pulling something over on the players? So maybe the NPC who gives them the farm is like, oh yeah, you know what? You come here tomorrow. Go to sleep tonight. I'm going to get everything ready tonight. And then you come back tomorrow and I'll have everything ready. Then they come back tomorrow. The farm is empty. All the cows, all the chickens, everything, right? Just dead quiet. Like that's something simple that doesn't take a lot of work on your part to pull off, but it's great. It's a great way to be like, oh, of course the NPC got frustrated and just decided to ghost the players. And maybe he warned the local constable being like, hey, these guys ran me out of town. Or maybe they'll be like, you know what? You can have my farm. And it turns out they were initially hesitant because they were like, oh no, there's been something haunting our farm, and they were kind of trying to protect you and the party. But no, they were like, this guy's annoying. You know what? You can have my farm. And suddenly the players sleep over there the first night, and one of them, they wake up and one of them's just gone after failing a saving throw, right? So there's multiple ways you can do it, but just the switcheroo, the sudden, giving in of being like, you know what, you've wheeled me down. Yeah, sure. And then being like, okay, come on. Did you really think it would go that easy? So that's just a little example of like a conversational chaos that, players think they got their way. Turns out not so much, but it really surprises them because they were pushing so hard and it didn't seem like it would work. But, it doesn't mean you can't have fun with it. Now, let's talk about exploration. The pro tip for adding chaos to exploration here is, I'm titling it Fall Through or Fall Forward. When exploration becomes too controlled, it becomes too boring, in my opinion. By controlled, I mean the players start to approach every door with a list of pre-actions. They check for a billion traps, check every corner for a secret hatch, clear every corner for lurking enemies, right? It becomes some weird SWAT version of D&D. So maybe don't let them call the shots on that. And I don't mean that you're pointing out which rooms they have to check out. You do it in a more creative way, right? You move them without their say-so by adding some chaos. Suddenly the lights go out. And while they fumble around and they try and, activate some light spells or various other things, it doesn't seem to work. It's almost supernatural darkness. Or it does somewhat work, but, as soon as the light comes on, they're in a different room entirely. And they don't know how that happened. Which totally works because you're in D&D and some ruins or dungeons can shift around, right? So that's a fun way to change it up just in a simple way, right? Or let's say that they step on a button and all of them fall, but not into a spike pit, but into an entirely new, empty, huge cavern. That's a new area of the ancient ruins that they happen to be exploring. Or maybe they even find a secret passage that ends up skipping over a whole part of the ruin. Maybe they were at the start and they were looking, okay, I see that it's this many different major sections or areas. And you kind of are like, yeah, it's a long way away. And suddenly they take a shortcut and they're like right in front of the boss's room. But then they go in and it's empty, right? It's all about changing it up on them, subverting expectations. Because then as soon as that happens, you can kind of throw a curveball at them. Be like, okay, so suddenly they're in this boss room and everything seems to be going swimmingly. And then they pick up the idol and a boulder chases them. Or, getting back to Indiana Jones. Or they pick up the idol and they start heading out. And then they're halfway through this empty place and suddenly the entire ruin starts collapsing on them. Or even better, they realize that they got to the end and they got the golden idol, but the shortcut that they took is suddenly closed. And now it's like, oh, we have what we want. We want to get out of here. But if we go back through this dungeon, there are things that we had thought that we had skipped. And now we have to face them from the opposite direction, which is actually kind of fun. It could give you and the players like a chance to play around with a lot of ambushes and stuff like that, right? The point is, it's a fall through or fall forward. Fall as in it's out of the player's control or it's unexpected. And it's either getting them ahead or it's getting them, it's changing up their plans in the immediate future so that they don't just approach everything as if it's, just boring and if it's systematic, right? It's all about breaking up the flow, changing up the playing field and changing the rules of the exploration so that they don't fall into that overly analytical approach room by room. It's kind of almost like quality over quantity when you take this approach, because you've probably thought like, oh, but what if I made this whole dungeon? Can't the players go through it all? They can, but you'll find out pretty soon that it's like, yeah, it's almost like playing an RPG or a JRPG where there's random encounters, like a Pokemon type thing, right? Eventually having random encounters gets really old. And you're like, man, I would love to just get to the meat and potatoes. This was fun for the first few rooms of this dungeon, but now it's not as special. But if you suddenly make it so that like, oh, they slid to an entire new area that they weren't aware of, that's exciting. Or the dungeon, they have to tackle it in a different order than they thought. That's exciting too. There's many ways that, having them fall through or fall forward can change up the dynamic in more ways than you realize. And it was fairly simple for you to do. Now, here's the challenge for you at the end of this episode. I want you to throw your players for a loop. Get a reaction from them, the kind you can see on their faces. You could do this with a storyline or plot twist, or in a role play, or in a combat, or maybe during your next dungeon. If you get one shocked reaction, you've completed this challenge. So be chaotic. Allow yourself to do things a little bit more excitingly or a little bit more unexpectedly, because that is a big part of storytelling. It's not following the obvious plot, right? That's why anyone who's read a certain genre loves it when people do a twist on that genre. They love it when they can't absolutely predict everything, right? And that's what's so fun about this. So go out there, make sure to just surprise your players by being as chaotic as possible, within reason and purposefully. But I hope you have a good time, and until next time, let's roll initiative.